everybody. I hope you're doing well and feeling well. Thank you so much for listening to episode 10 of the Cycle Podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Boudreau, and on this episode, I talked with Samantha, who's from Canada, and I actually asked her some questions about universal health care and treatment in Canada, but also she shares her story about her struggles with endometriosis, taking 10 years to get diagnosed, and how she has 3 beautiful children now. I hope you enjoy this episode, and if you'd like to be on an episode of the Cycle Podcast, please reach out to me. You can find my contact information on melissaboudreau.com. That's www.melissaboudreau.com. I've also linked it in the podcast so you don't have to spell my last name. And again, I really appreciate everyone for being here. Thank you so much. Thank you for all the positive feedback, and I hope you enjoy episode 10. Hey, Samantha.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you today?
I'm not too bad, not too bad.
Good. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
I'm really excited. I was hesitating reaching out to you, and then I thought, you know what? You only live once. Let's just do this and see what happens.
Wonderful. Well, I know that our listeners will really appreciate you sharing your story, and I really appreciate you reaching out. So let's just jump right into it. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself? It doesn't have to be endo related, just like anything and everything you want to share, just so we can get to know you a little bit better, and then we'll jump into the endo stuff.
Sounds good. So I live in Canada. I'm in Ontario, in a small rural town just outside of Ottawa. So that's probably a city that more people will be familiar with. And it's myself, my husband, we have 2 dogs, and we have 3 children. So I have 2 biological children and 1 child through adoption.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, and you were my first Canadian on the show, so I'm very excited.
Well, hopefully I'll give us a good reputation.
I'm sure you will. Okay, well, let's just start off in the beginning. When did your first period come? Do you remember how old you were?
So I would have been in grade 6, so I'm going to guess I was about 12, give or take.
Okay. And then when you first had your period, was it painful? Do you remember anything at that age, or did it seem fairly normal?
So I remember the first few years from what I can remember, and I actually just had a chat not too long ago with my mom about how everything started for me. She said everything was fairly normal, and then it was probably when I was about 15 that I started having painful periods and heavier bleeding, and just symptoms started getting worse and worse. My mom had excruciating periods, so she was, thank goodness, very supportive and wanted to make sure that I saw doctors and we figured out what was going on, because she certainly didn't try to normalize it, or, we've all, I think a lot of us endo ladies have heard the story, it's just part of being a woman, and periods are not fun. You have to get used to it. So thank goodness I had a mom that wasn't like that. So she actually brought me to the Children's Hospital in Ottawa, and she had told me that I was diagnosed with cysts on my ovaries when I was about 16. So at that point, I was put on the birth control pill to try to regulate my cycles and help with the heavy bleeding, because I was not only having heavy periods, but they were sometimes lasting up to 3 weeks, which was pretty hard. I was borderline anemic, so it was getting to be certainly unmanageable. So that's when things really started to become a problem.
Now, was your mom ever diagnosed with endometriosis?
So she was never diagnosed with endometriosis. However, she ended up having a hysterectomy at 36 because they were not able to control the heavy bleeding.
Okay.
I'm not sure in the end what her official diagnosis was, but I do know that they left her ovaries behind, but she had a full hysterectomy. So she had her uterus and her cervix taken, and it was pretty much after she had a very good gynecologist who had given her lots of other options, and she had a D&C and different hormones, but nothing was working, and it was she ended up becoming anemic. So it got quite bad for her. So they ended up doing a hysterectomy.
Right. Sounds like she probably maybe did have endo and maybe anomiosis as well. I mean, not that I'm a doctor, but just based on her symptoms and that you have it, seems like it's could potentially be part of the reason why she had so much pain too.
I think so. I certainly, I think had there been even close to the awareness there is now, which is
Right.
still not to what we need it to be,
Right.
um, likely she would have been diagnosed and, that she could have been potentially given different treatment options.
Sure, sure. Okay, so going back to you now, 3 weeks of bleeding in high school sounds terrible. I'm so sorry that you had to deal with that. Did you miss out on a lot of like high school things? Did you just start to live it as a new normal? Like, how did that affect your, your day to day in high school? Because 3 weeks of bleeding and pain, I'm sure it altered some of the things that you did.
Absolutely. So I had so here in Ottawa, there's actually an arts high school. So I was part of the arts program for the first few years of high school. So we essentially had an extra almost 2 hours of school a day where we had our art. So I was in the vocal program. So on top of your regular high school days, we had this additional program. Plus, there were mandatory lessons you had to take outside of school, and you had to participate in different competitions and so on and so forth. So it was absolutely took every ounce of everything I had to continue, because if you didn't keep your grades up, then you were kicked out of the program essentially, because they didn't want it to affect your your academics and your ability to finish high school. So it was definitely a really big struggle to try to still attend school enough that I could be there for everything I had to, but then manage the fact that I was having these 3 week long periods that were far from comfortable, that's for sure.
Right, right. And so it's great that your mom was understanding, which is amazing, and didn't tell you it was normal, because that's what happens to a lot of girls. And it's not even their mom's fault. It's because for years and years and years, everybody's told, oh, you just have painful cramps. It's normal. And so that's at least you had that advantage, which is really nice. But when you went to the doctor and told them everything that was going on, what did your doctor say?
So it was actually my mom who pushed for me to see other specialists at the hospital. I had an older male doctor, and he was fine, but he had that mentality of periods are just difficult and you just have to manage them. So she pushed pretty hard to get those referrals, and I ended up going to the hospital. And part of that process actually also included seeing a gastroenterologist, because I started having digestive issues.
Mm-hmm.
I'll never forget, I remember having to eat these horrific cookies that just tasted like cardboard, and they were called bowel buddies. What
Oh.
kid doesn't want to bring those to school? So
I should pick some of those up.
I'm telling you, they were certainly from an Oreo. So that was, and it's funny because now, knowing what we know, I'm actually I follow a gluten-free diet, so it essentially was probably doing the complete opposite of what I needed it to do.
Right,
And
right.
my mom still apologizes for that, because she was overloading with fiber and wheat and all these things and trying to
Well,
help me.
yeah, none of us knew. I used to, those digestive crackers, like I used
Oh
to eat
yes.
those like crazy because I also had digestive issues. And I'm like, well, this is a digestive cracker. This must help.
Right.
Okay, so you went and did all these tests and saw these doctors. What was the outcome of that in high school?
So I basically, I can't remember the exact number, but I'm sure I had to have been on at least 6 or 7 different birth control pills during high school,
Mm-hmm.
just, not seeing any changes, or, having side effects that I just couldn't manage, whether it was migraines or really bad acne, mood swings, that sort of thing. So I was bounced around prescription to another. And then I sort of just didn't want anything to do with it anymore. I was done. I mean, I was a teenager, and then I was in university, and I was having a good time, and I decided, you know what, I'm not interested in all of this anymore. And I sort of just put it aside and figured this is just my period and I just have to get over it. So that's just what I did.
Did any of those pills or anything, did it at least help like shorten it and reduce the pain for a time period, or were the side effects just too great? Like for me personally, I went through something very similar and tried all these different ones, and the one that you only get your period once every 4 months and all of that. I did all of those, but for me, same thing. I couldn't handle the side effects, and I just was like, I'm done. I cannot do these. But I did notice, like, at least my period was lighter.
Yes, definitely. It's certainly, the duration was shorter. The pain was manageable. Although that's a perspective just from what I was used to, right? I'm sure that pain was still beyond what women who have normal periods get. But for me, this is great. I can manage this. But I ended up, the hardest side effect for me with hormones are the headaches. Yeah. They were daily, and it didn't matter if I would try taking the pill in the morning, I would try taking it at night, all the different suggestions. And it just got to the point where I couldn't manage the headaches anymore. But that being said, I ended up, it was in my first year of university that I met my now husband, and we were married about 2 years later. So we ended up deciding we wanted to try having children right away. So I stopped the birth control pill for that purpose. So
at any point though, in all of this, did any doctor ever say the word endometriosis to you?
No, definitely not. No, nobody ever. Honestly, there was nothing beyond the cysts that they definitely confirmed. Sure. They also really pushed that I had digestive issues, and I tried different things, but certainly not a gluten-free diet or anything like that. But nothing beyond those two things.
Right. I'm sure. Did they diagnose you with IBS by chance?
They didn't. It was brought up, but I wonder if that's just because I sort of stopped going to see all the doctors.
No, for sure.
Who knew? Maybe that would have eventually happened.
Right. Okay. So now you're in university, you meet your husband, and you decide that you guys want to try to have children. Now what happens?
So I would have been, I'm trying to think, I would have been 21 at the time. And here I had thought, that like a lot of women, not all, but a lot of women, I had spent my early 20s avoiding pregnancy like the plague. And then we went off the pill and nothing happened.
Right.
And here I am thinking, hang on now. This is supposed to just happen. I'm young.
Right. First try.
Yeah. How is this not happening? So then I started actually charting my periods and my temperatures, and I had a thermometer on my bedside, and I was, doing all of that to try to figure out what was going on. And we ended up getting pregnant. It took us 9 months.
Okay.
So 9 cycles. So it wasn't terrible, right. But I think compared to most 21-year-olds, it probably was pretty long.
Sure. Okay.
So I got pregnant, and I had a pretty complicated pregnancy that ended in an emergency C-section because so it was a pregnancy, and it had a not so easy finish to it. But I ended up, they were able, thank goodness, to I spent a couple extra days in hospital, and we went home, and I didn't really much about my period because I was nursing, so it hadn't come back. So when it did come back, it was much more manageable than it had been, that's for sure. And we knew we wanted more children, so I didn't bother going on the pill. We knew that breastfeeding was not an effective method of birth control. However, we were willing to take the risk given it didn't
when you had
happen
the C-section,
very easily in the first place.
Did you have cysts, or did they notice anything or say anything when they were, basically doing this surgery on you?
They didn't say anything, but I do wonder if
and they had other things
that
they were focused on just getting the baby out.
Yeah. that's just it. And then to further complicate things, I actually had a condition, it's polyhydramnios. And
Okay.
so I had excess amniotic
Wow.
fluid. So I had about 3 times the amount that most women.
Wow.
So that made things even more complicated. So there was a on. So um, I'm not sure if it's that
Yeah.
they didn't see anything,
Right.
or maybe it was just way too
Right.
chaotic
Right.
for anyone
Okay.
to have
Okay. So
gotten attention.
now
Amazing.
you're breastfeeding and you're feeling a little bit better, and obviously you have a beautiful newborn child, and you guys aren't being careful, but you're also not thinking you're going to get pregnant right away. What happens after that?
So then we decided, trying to think. So my son would have been about 2 when we decided to start
Mm-hmm.
charting my temperatures and that sort of thing again. We wanted the boys to be a little, well, we didn't know they're both going to be boys, but at the time we wanted the children to be close together. So it ended up
Okay.
actually the second time
Okay.
around, it took us 11 months to get pregnant. Um, and then I got pregnant and I had much better pregnancy that time around. However, we ended up opting for a scheduled C-section just because I was sort of borderline on the time frame for a vaginal birth after C-section. So we kind of decided as with my doctor and my husband, we all decided that we were going to go ahead and just go ahead with a scheduled C-section,
Sure.
considering how scary the first time was around. I just
Absolutely.
wasn't want any surprises. Um,
Okay. And then in that
so that's
11
what we did
months
the
that you were
second time
trying to get
around.
pregnant, were you having painful periods, or what was it like period wise?
So they were starting to get heavier and more painful again. They certainly weren't as bad as they were in high school, but I definitely noticed a difference. I could see that things were sort of
Right,
going
right.
back to
Okay.
what they
Okay,
used to
so
be in
then you
high
have your
school.
second C-section, scheduled C-section. Everything go okay?
Yeah, everything was fine and no complications. And we were good. And I went home, and
Right.
suddenly I had a toddler and a newborn, and
Yeah, life
that
was a
was
little
a great
busy, and
time.
then all of a sudden you start to not feel well again, is my guess.
That's just it. So, we were just sort of we were getting into this rhythm of being a family of 4, and my periods started getting pretty painful again, and they were getting heavy. We were going back to sort of where I was at towards the end of high school. So they weren't quite lasting 3 weeks, but there were some that would go, close to the 2 week mark. So I started to consider going back on the pill just to see if that would help. And then we started talking about, well, do we want a third or do we not? So we didn't I didn't go back on the pill because we weren't really too sure. And I was still breastfeeding. And in comparison to what my periods had been before, they were still manageable. So I ended up actually getting pregnant again. However, that pregnancy ended in miscarriage. So I miscarried at about, I
Sorry.
think it was about 11 weeks that I miscarried. And it was it wasn't straightforward in the sense that I went to the emergency room when I first started spotting, and they did the blood work and had me come back the next day, and my levels were still continuing to go up. So they said, okay, well, some women have spotting, and let's just see how it goes. So I was going for blood work every few days, and things were still going along well. And then all of a sudden, the next blood test, the levels had dropped significantly. So I ended up miscarrying on naturally. I didn't have to have a D&C, but it just went sideways. My absolutely excruciating. My husband was working nights at the time, and I remember on a few occasions calling him because I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to function with the kids if somebody woke up or needed something, because I couldn't even get out of bed. So he had to come home quite a few times, and it was just escalating. And very quickly, it got to the point
Mm.
where the pain was inducing vomiting, and it was just unreal. And of course, here I am thinking, okay, well, it's my period, so I'm popping Midol like
Right.
Tic Tacs and thinking it was going to do
Right.
anything, and obviously it did nothing. So I was
What
in
did you do?
absolute
So now,
agony.
how
It was
long does this go
awful.
on, and what do you do? At some point, you must be like, something is wrong with me.
Well, I knew there was something definitely very wrong, but we also knew that we wanted to get pregnant again. So we sort of made a decision that what I would do before I went back on the pill, thinking, okay, well, the pill is usually
Right.
what makes these periods manageable. We decided to go to in Ottawa. So we were patients with the fertility clinic, but we had decided ahead of time, what we were willing to do and what we weren't willing to do, just because given everything that had happened before. And long story short, I ended up having to have, they did like an exploratory surgery because they weren't able to easily determine a cause of my infertility. And everything was checking out okay with my husband. And it was during that exploratory surgery that they confirmed that I had endometriosis and severe adhesion.
Mm-hmm. So, was this doctor experienced in endometriosis, or did they kind of close you up and say, like, look, you had a lot, it was crazy? What did they do in the exploratory? Was it just to find out and then they closed you up?
Well, she dealt with some of, or the majority of the adhesions. She said essentially I had been, what did she say? She said I had been ovulating
Mm-hmm.
into a spider web. So
Yep.
that's how she described it. She cleaned up all the adhesions and
Mm-hmm.
she used ablation to get rid of the endometriosis that she saw. She's very good at what she does as
Right.
a fertility doctor, but she certainly isn't an
Sure.
endometriosis specialist. And I, of course, said, sorry,
Yeah.
and know what? So I had, yeah. So she's telling me, oh, I burnt everything off. And I thought, okay, that
Mm-hmm.
sounds great. Let's see what happens. And basically, we were sent on our way, and oh, yep, you'll get pregnant now.
Mm-hmm.
It'll all be fine.
How old are you when
Mhm.
this is happening now?
So I would have been probably, I'm trying to think, maybe about 26,
Right.
27
Right.
in
So
that
you've been dealing,
age
right.
range.
That's like the average, you start having painful periods in high school, and that's usually around that age, about 10 years of having pain before you get diagnosed.
Right.
Okay. Right. So she does that, and I have a feeling I know where potentially the story is going, but what happens after you have that surgery? And did you go home and Google this and be like, "Oh my goodness, I've had this for so long. I can't believe it."
Honestly, I definitely did. I thought, how did nobody figure this out? I had every symptom. I had, like, it was like there was a flashing light over my head saying, you have endometriosis,
Yeah.
and nobody noticed. So I thought, come on, 10
Mm-hmm.
years, this is what it took. So I at least was happy to know that it had a name and that it wasn't just that, I had bad luck. Although I guess in a way we do, but that it actually was something that had a name and there were treatments for it. So that
Right.
was a bit of a relief. However, unfortunately, I also had this false sense of hope and security that ablation was all I needed and we were going to get pregnant and we would live
Right.
happily ever
Right.
after. That's definitely not
Yeah.
what happened.
Yep. Okay. So after that, where are you guys trying to get pregnant again?
So yeah, we were still trying to get pregnant, and then so that was I had that surgery in May, and then in November of that same year, I woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning with the most excruciating pain I've ever had in my life. So I thought, okay, this is that endometriosis they've been talking about. It must be back. Well, it actually was
Mm,
my appendix, and unfortunately, because this is the one time that I think, for me anyways, that endometriosis was acknowledged in the emergency room and something else was completely missed because they hung on to
right.
that diagnosis. So I was sent home,
No.
yes, that it had been a
Oh, of
ruptured
course
cyst.
it was.
And my poor husband, I remember him standing there saying, you don't understand. she has had this disease. She's been in pain, but this is different. And no, sir, they're very painful. It's a cyst. Take her home.
Oh my
Let her sleep it off.
God.
And sure enough, by the next morning, the fever, the vomiting, the diarrhea, all of that had started. So, meanwhile, we're looking for a family member to come out and take care of our two children so we can rush off to the hospital. And I ended up in emergency surgery that night. So I had woken up on the Saturday morning at 5, and it wasn't until about midnight Sunday evening into Monday morning that I had my surgery. So my appendix had likely ruptured Friday overnight.
My goodness. And a lot of people that have endo, their appendix is covered in endo as well. I wonder if yours was.
So they did mention that they saw endo, and I actually also had, she saw that I had a twisted fallopian tube.
That's probably from a giant cyst that you had that nobody took you serious about. Seriously.
Exactly. So that was quite the ordeal, and it ended up in the hospital for a week on antibiotics and all of that. So that all happened, and then I went home. And then my husband and I had a long talk about what are we going to do? We still want more children, but my body had been through so much in the last year. And we just didn't know if we wanted, because we knew obviously at this point it would likely be a third C-section. And, we had read things that it looks like endometriosis might require more than one surgery. So we thought, you know what? We've always wanted to adopt. Why don't we move on to that plan? Maybe this is our sign. This is time. It's time to stop and just let my body heal and focus on that plan. So that's when we started looking into adoption.
That's amazing. I mean, that's really beautiful. And I love that you guys sat and talked about it. It's such a big deal, And
it really is. And I think that, it's a hard decision. And I know that a lot of women with endometriosis are struggling with infertility, and some of us are lucky enough to conceive and others aren't. But we had always wanted to adopt. My younger sisters adopted, so it had always been something I really wanted to do. And kind of felt like maybe, my body just needed to be left to healing and time. So we decided to start looking at that as an option.
Okay, good. And so after you heal up from all of this, you had a crazy year and a lot of surgery. Does the pain come back?
It sure did. So it came back because at this point I had only had ablation, right? So I had the surgery, and then I had the appendectomy. So the pain came back, and it was getting progressively worse. But at least this time I knew that it wasn't normal. This was not something to go on the pill and hope for the best. So I see my gynecologist, my OBGYN that had actually delivered my second son, and started talking to him. And although he's not an endometriosis specialist, he's quite knowledgeable. And he's a great doctor in the sense that if it's something that he feels is kind of beyond his specialty, he will reach out to other doctors. So I was very lucky to have him. And I ended up being put onto Vizan.
Okay.
So I was on Vizan for a while, which, side effects aside.
Yeah, I don't know what that is. I don't know that we have that in the States, or it's called something different here. Is it did it suppress your hormones?
So it's actually I hope I get this right. So if I can remember correctly, it's a progesterone hormone. So it's progesterone type hormone. And it actually is meant to help suppress the endometriosis. So it slows the growth essentially. For a lot of women, it stops their periods. And after 3 months of taking it stopped my periods. So at least I didn't have a period anymore. And my pain was minimal. I would have flare-ups, which were usually either brought on. Two of my biggest triggers are food. There are different foods like gluten and dairy that are huge triggers for me. Or unfortunately, intercourse. That's usually another big trigger for me. for flare-ups. So I seem to be at a point where really, the flare-ups were few and far between, but unfortunately there are a lot of side effects. I had migraines, I had emotions from, everything from sadness to just anger, and it was pretty hard to manage, especially being a mom and a wife, and I work full time out of the outside of the home, so there were a lot of people that I had to interact with, and I was just having a really hard time controlling my emotions and trying to keep myself on track. Right. So yeah, but I was trying to stay focused on the fact that it had stopped my periods and it was making my pain manageable. So I thought, well, let's see how long I can stay on this for. So I know that a lot of doctors don't recommend that you stay on it long term. I think that when I was on it, which was a few years ago, it was recommended no more than 5 years over a lifetime. Okay. So I hit about the 7-8 month mark in that neighborhood. I went back to see my gynecologist, and he sent me for some imaging. I had an MRI done with the contrast dye, so they could have a better chance of seeing if endo had come back or the adhesions. And the text said essentially the screen just lit up like a Christmas tree.
Yeah.
So we went ahead with another surgery at that point in time.
Okay.
So that surgery, thank goodness, was actually my gynecologist, and he brought in one of our Ottawa, who is an absolute angel. He's an excision specialist, and that's all he does. He just treats women with endometriosis and other other diseases. He says, I don't deliver babies. I don't do any of that. My focus is just on, helping deal with these diseases. So he was there, and during that surgery, I lost the fallopian tube. It was the one that actually was twisted that they saw during my appendectomy, but they were able to do excision, and they removed all the adhesions, and it ended up giving me about 3.5 years of nearly pain-free and quite manageable periods.
Amazing. And I just want to say, I love that your doctor brought in an excision specialist. That is such an A+ doctor move. And I know there's a lot of doctors, and I don't like to doctor shame, but there's a lot of doctors that have egos that won't do that. So I love that your doctor did that and basically said, like, hey, we need to bring in extra help because we can tell that you have very severe disease. Did they stage you at that point? Did they tell you a stage?
Yeah, so I had stage 4.
Okay.
It was pretty extensive, but the other thing that's always been a huge problem for me is the adhesions. They cause a significant amount of the issues and the pain for me.
Yeah. And more surgery, more adhesions. I mean, it's just, exactly. And endo looks like an adhesion. So it's so hard. So at this point, how many surgeries have you had?
So I had,
with the C-sections.
Oh, with the C-sections. So I had the 2 C-sections, the
appendectomy,
and this one. So that's was surgery number 5.
5. Yeah. Wow. And that, I mean, that's just hard with the scar tissue. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's just it. So, but it, like I said, it gave me quite a few years of manageable periods, and the pain was manageable. I did stay on Vizan for 6 months after the surgery, but at that point, I just had enough with the side effects. And my doctor was fine with me going off. He said, you know what, you stayed on it 6 months. Hopefully that suppressed the, some of the endometriosis that would have come back, shortly after surgery if it was going to. And at that point, I went off for a few months, and then I went on to birth control because I started having a little bit more pain and the bleeding was getting a bit heavier. So it certainly wasn't anywhere near what it was, but it was one of those situations where I thought, you know what, let's just deal with this before it gets out of hand. So I went back on the pill.
Sure. Okay. And when was that? Where are we in the timeline? Like, how long ago was that from today?
So that surgery was in 2015.
Okay.
In the summer. So it was in July. And then once I healed up from that and we were in a better place, we were full on into the adoption process. So we, we were a whole different kind of busy and just involved in that. And we adopted my daughter through foster care.
Amazing.
And so we were really focused on that and just growing our family. And throughout the time that we were doing that, I went on the pill for a little while, and then, as I mentioned earlier, the hormones tend to give me pretty severe headaches. So what I would usually do, and I was bad, I didn't usually tell my doctors, but I would just sort of take a break for a couple of months. And I just felt like my body just needs to just not be on synthetic hormones.
Yes.
So I would stop for a little bit and have a few months of, okay, yeah, my periods are not fun, but I don't have a headache every day.
Right.
So I would kind of do these little breaks every couple of months. And then I ended up, shortly after we adopted my daughter, I ended up just going off the pill. And I thought, you know what, let's just see what happens. And it was probably about 7 or 8 months ago that the pain started getting really bad again, and everything started getting worse, including the heaviest periods I've had to date. They've been absolutely ridiculous. So I'm now scheduled in either November or December for a hysterectomy.
Okay. Yeah. And, it sounds like did they ever say anomiosis to you? Did they give you a hysteroscopy to see inside the uterus if you had endo in the uterus?
So they didn't give me one. However, the surgeon that's going to do this surgery is actually the surgeon that was called in to help on my last surgery.
Okay.
So he looked over my file, and because he's pretty hard to get an appointment with, and I guess after looking over my post-op paperwork, he remembered my case and remembered how bad it was.
Severe. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so he took me on as a patient, so I'm really lucky. And he was actually the one that suggested that could be what's going on, and that could be part of the reason that my periods are just ridiculous.
So heavy. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, that's great news. Are you nervous about having the hysterectomy? Are you excited? I mean, how are you feeling about it? Because I'm personally asking you that because I'm going down a similar path and I don't know what I want to do.
I'm a little bit of both. I'm excited at the idea of never having a period again.
Oh, yeah. That part, yes. Same page.
Yes. Especially because they've been so heavy lately, to the point where I've had situations in public restrooms that nobody should have to deal with.
Yes.
And like at work, and you're just thinking, oh God, please don't let anybody come in.
Yeah. Or you're like in a meeting and you're like, I'm scared something's going to happen in this meeting and I can't move. Yeah, I understand.
Oh, if I get up.
Right.
So that part excites me. And going back to my mom, she was only a year older. So I'm 35 now, and my mom was 36 when she had her hysterectomy. So I've been chatting with her a lot about, how that changed things for her. Now, at this point in time, we're just going ahead with my uterus and my cervix.
Okay.
We're trying to keep both ovaries. However, my right ovary right now, I have a 6-centimeter endometrioma on it.
Mm-hmm.
So he's had me sign off that he has permission to go ahead and remove that ovary if he's not able to save it.
Sure.
And then we're going to remove my other fallopian tube.
Mm-hmm.
He actually was talking to me about some studies that have been going on for the past about 7 years in Vancouver, Canada, that have linked reduction in ovarian cancer with the removal of the fallopian tubes in a hysterectomy. Mm-hmm. And seeing as, us with endometriosis, there have been studies that are showing that we may be at a higher risk. He said that often he'll recommend that we go ahead with removing the fallopian tubes to try to minimize that additional risk that we tend to have.
Sure. Okay. Well, that's a lot, but I do see a light at the end of the tunnel for you. I really hope that this helps out. And That's so great. Now, I have this might be a random question, but because healthcare in the US is so crazy and like for women to get excision here, it's very hard and insurance doesn't cover it. And I know in Canada, it's free or like universal healthcare or free healthcare. I don't 100% know how it works. Is excision covered as part of that?
Yeah, yeah. So this is all covered, and we're very
That's amazing. Yeah.
lucky. So, you know, it's universal. We obviously, it's paid through our taxes. However, I'm very lucky to have that. But that being said, it does translate to very long wait lists. So
Sure.
that's sort of the trade-off.
Right.
I know that I am very lucky that I'm going to be that I was seen, sorry, and that my surgery will be likely within the next few months. I know a lot of women have up to a 12-month wait just to see this doctor. And then after that, who knows how long before they actually
Can
have a
get
surgery.
surgery. Right.
So, it's sort of twisted to say it, but in a way, I'm glad I'm as severe as I am, because at least this means I'm going to be treated sooner.
Yep.
But it can be a serious struggle, especially depending on where you live. Some cities have longer wait lists. Obviously, if there's a larger population and a higher incidence of diseases that require these types of surgery, you're going to have to wait longer. So you will see a lot of women in Canada that actually travel to different provinces or different cities within the province they live in just to try to get in to be seen and to have a surgery sooner.
Right. I mean, that makes sense. Yeah, that's definitely, we both have positives and negatives on both of the sides for healthcare for sure. Well, for the people listening, obviously you've been dealing with this for a very long time, and you mentioned not eating dairy and gluten, which I don't either. I'm actually allergic to dairy, and then I don't do gluten, I don't do caffeine, I don't do alcohol anymore. I mean, I've cut a lot of things out just because endometriosis feeds off of inflammation, which is, it can come from running too far, it can come from being in the sun too long. So those are some of the things that cause flare-ups. But are there any tips or tricks besides cutting out dairy and gluten that have really worked for you that maybe some of the women listening could try?
I think that if you're physically able to exercise, it really makes a difference. And obviously, it doesn't have to be a half marathon, just whatever you can manage. And within that, I would say be sure to figure out an exercise that works for you, because for a while I was going to the gym regularly, and I decided one day to jump on the bike, and that was the biggest mistake I ever made. I had the most ridiculous flare up for days after that. So the other thing that I find really bothers me is swimming. So I think it's, exercise at what works for you, because I find that helps with, you're going to sleep better, you're going to feel better, and obviously it's not going to make your endo go away, but if you can have better rest and you're just feeling better and you have more energy, because a lot of us are lacking in that department, I think that's another thing that I've really tried to do. And of course, there are times where I've not been able to, like just today, I was pretty let down because this was the first year in 7 years that I wasn't able to participate with my kids in, we have a 5K run to support our Canadian military, and we do it as a family every year. And I had to stay home because I didn't even think I could walk 5K if I tried. I guess that would be just over 2.5 miles.
Yeah. Yep.
You guys? Okay. But
it's
yeah,
3.1 miles.
Close.
But
yeah,
that's far. I mean, when you're in pain, that's a long way to go. But I want to echo what you're saying, because I used to do spinning classes like crazy and had no idea, and would get headaches after, and just I was having flare-ups, but I literally didn't put two and two together. I always thought, oh, I'm just not drinking enough water. When I stopped doing that, and all I do now is strength train, and you're right, everybody has to pick their own, because I know people endo that run marathons and they're fine. You have to figure out what works for you. But strength training for me personally, even if I'm in pain, when I leave the gym that day, I feel better. it helps the blood flow. It helps me not feel such intense pain. Now, on the really bad days and I'm bent over, no, there's no way I'm going to the gym. But on the days that you're like, you think you can get there, if you can just get there and even stretch or foam roll or yoga or something, it does help reduce the pain, because I think your muscles get so hypersensitive in the nerves because of the pain that it almost helps to relax them. So
Absolutely.
I agree with you 100% on that tip.
And I think just on that same note of, giving your muscles that exercise and that, the other thing that's been really good for me is massage therapy. Because if you think about it, we spend pretty much every day compensating for some form of pain. So we're not moving about the way that we would if we didn't have this pain, or if we didn't have the adhesions or the cysts, or, the list goes on. So I think that massage or physio or even stretching, strength training, anything will just help with that, because we have to sort of remember that we're constantly compensating. It's like when you think about if you've sprained your ankle and then you start having these other pains in your other foot, or so you have to realize that as you compensate for that pain, you're going to get aches and pains in other places, and you need to deal with that, because if your list of aches and pains is just getting longer and longer, it's also draining mentally and emotionally to just feel like everything hurts all the time. Why do we even bother going out or trying to go about my day if I know that something is going to hurt?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's all very good points. And I agree with you on a lot of that. And it's tough when you have all that pain. And I do think that we compensate, and moving around is important. Even if you can just go for a little walk, it will help move things around a little bit.
Absolutely.
Okay, good. Well, is there anything else you want to add or share to the listeners?
I can't think of anything else. I think we've gone over everything, but I guess, like I said earlier, I hesitated with reaching out, but then I thought, you know what, I have a story that has a little bit of everything, and I've got probably a lot of things that are very familiar to a lot of other women that are listening, and hopefully I've been able to give some information, or even just for me anyways, when I talk to other women, or even just listening to other episodes of your podcast, it's just nice to know you're not alone. And it's even better when you hear somebody say something like, oh, I have this symptom, and you think, oh, I never thought that was something. So hopefully, I was able to give somebody one of those moments, or with adoption, if that's something that people have been kind of thinking about, it's a fantastic, totally legitimate way of growing your family. So, that's another thing I was really excited to share with everybody.
Well, we are so happy that you did share. And I think this podcast will be very helpful to a lot of people. And I mean, it's every time I talk to someone, it's helpful for me too, because I'm on the fence about a hysterectomy right now. And honestly, to hear your confidence and how you feel about it, and even that your mom did it and she, is great and she gave you advice on it, just gives me more comfort as someone who's on that fence as well. And just so everybody knows who's listening, hysterectomy is not a cure. And I know that was, false information that was given for many, many years. But for women with stage 4 or stage 4 plus, which it sounds like Samantha has, I know I for sure have. And if you have anomyosis, it is at least a step to feeling better and not having a period. And it can really help. I'm not suggesting that that's what you should do if you have stage 1, 2, 3, 4 endometriosis. But if you've tried excision, if multiple times like I have, or you're to your breaking point and you're a little bit older, I do think it's something to potentially consider, but everybody needs to do their research on it. That's for sure. I've been very hesitant. I'm 40 now. I don't have children. I don't plan on having children, but for some reason, I just have this fear about doing it, and I don't know why I have that. So thank you for sharing that.
No, for sure. And I'm definitely glad that I actually just got that information last week. I was sort of thinking in the back of my head, oh, I have some useful information to share when we chat. So, I totally agree. As much as I know it's not a cure, and I know that it can still come back. And if we're leaving my ovaries behind, that can still mean further complications and potentially more surgeries. But knowing that my period is not part of the equation anymore, it's definitely giving me a little bit of relief, knowing that it's a step towards, like you said, a step towards feeling better, and it's what's right for me. And I know that a lot of women struggle with making that decision. And if you try to post on an endo support group, that you'll get both sides. People are 100% for it and 1,000% against it, and that's fine because it doesn't work for everybody. But you just need to think about yourself and what works for you, because what works for me may not work for everybody else. But in the end, as long as you feel better and you're confident and happy and secure in the decisions that you've made for your health, that's all that matters in the end.
Yep. And that's the biggest thing with endometriosis. I talk about it on every podcast. You have to make the decisions for yourself. Endo affects every single person different. There is no recipe that works for everyone, unfortunately. And you always have to be your own advocate. You have to advocate for yourself. You have to do the research. I know it's not fair. And I know a lot of women don't like that. They want their doctors to be able to answer the questions. But unfortunately, this disease is still so unknown that we have to research and talk to other women and figure it out ourselves. And I really think that that's such a huge part about having endo, is doing a lot of the research, or at least following people on social media who are doing the research and posting about it, and making it, easily digestible so you can make educated decisions, because sometimes your doctors just don't have the right education about this disease.
That's for sure. Absolutely.
All right. Well, Samantha, thank you again for your time. And, maybe we'll do a follow-up 6 or 8 months after you have your hysterectomy and see how you're doing.
That would be great. Yeah, absolutely. I'll send you an email once I get a surgery date, and then we can touch base. I would love to do that.
Sounds wonderful. Okay. Well, take care, and we will be thinking about you during your surgery. We know you're going to be a warrior, and I really appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you so much. And hopefully everybody has a pain-free day and lots of pain-free days ahead of them.
Absolutely.
Okay, take care.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone, for listening to my chat with Samantha. I hope that you found it valuable, and thank you, Samantha, so much for sharing your story and your courage. Very inspiring, and we look forward to hearing from you in a few months to see how the hysterectomy surgery went and how you are feeling. I really appreciate everyone who listens to this podcast. I know I say it all the time, but it's really motivated me to keep going, and I will have a physical therapist on the next episode. So I'm trying to mix it up with stories and actual helpful content that can help you with endo. I am a longtime sufferer of endo, and I'm still having pain here and there, so I really just want to do my best to reach out and help as many people in the community that I can. If you ever have questions or problems or just need someone to talk to, you can find my contact information on my website, which is linked in this podcast, but also is melissaboudreau.com. If you want to find me on Instagram at endo_lady, I will get back to you there. And if this podcast brings you any value or you don't like it, please rate us in the iTunes store. Either way, I appreciate the rating. If it is a negative rating, please tell me what I can do better to make this podcast more valuable for you, and maybe it's even sound better. I don't know, but I want to do my best to provide the best content that I can for you and actually help you. And just know, I know endometriosis is hard, and it's a daily struggle, and it's a chronic illness. As someone who's been suffering since my teenage years, and I'm 40 now, I know how hard it can be, and I have terrible days too, but there is always hope, and I want you to hang on to that, because I talk to a lot of women who feel better now or have more good days than bad, and I want to help you feel like that too. Thank you again so much for listening. I appreciate you, and I hope you enjoy episode 10. Take care. Be well.
The podcast you just heard was made using Anchor. Ever thought about making your own podcast? Anchor makes it really easy for anyone to get started. It's a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing podcasts. Best of all, it's 100% free. Sign up now at anchor.fm/new. That's anchor.fm/new to get started.